Imagine the room falling silent as King Charles slowly turned toward Catherine, with every royal figure watching what happened next. What if that moment revealed more than ceremony? What if it exposed Charles's vision for the monarchy's future? For years, Catherine has stood beside William, quietly earning public trust through duty, resilience, and service. Now, a stunning claim suggests Charles's final public act could have symbolically elevated her into an entirely new role. Was this really a crowning, or something even more significant hiding behind the royal spectacle? A crown with a deeper meaning. The claim sounds almost impossible, King Charles turning toward Catherine and symbolically placing a crown upon her, as though announcing that she had become something more than the future queen. Yet the most important question is not whether the dramatic image is true. It is what such a moment would mean if Charles were deliberately elevating Catherine's importance within the monarchy. The story becomes extraordinary because William remains the heir. Under the established succession, Catherine cannot simply replace him or inherit the throne ahead of him. Official royal family records continue to identify William as the Prince of Wales and Catherine as the Princess of Wales. That makes the idea of a literal crowning especially significant because it would suggest something far beyond a ceremonial gesture. There is, however, another way to understand the claim. Charles could recognize Catherine's growing public importance without changing a single rule of succession. Her position could be strengthened through visibility, responsibility, and the trust she has built with the public. In that sense, the crown becomes less a legal object and more a symbol of influence. That distinction is where the mystery deepens. Catherine has become one of the most recognizable figures within the modern monarchy, and her public role has developed far beyond appearances at formal ceremonies. Her work, resilience, and connection with ordinary people have helped shape how many view the institution's younger generation. For Charles, that public connection could carry enormous value at a time when the monarchy must balance centuries of tradition with the expectations of a changing society. The alleged gesture therefore raises a larger question. Was Charles attempting to announce Catherine as a new constitutional leader? Or was he signaling that she could become one of the monarchy's most important emotional and public anchors? Those are very different things. One would require a fundamental change to the established order. The other could happen quietly through influence, trust, and the responsibilities placed before her. There is also William's position to consider. Any interpretation that presents Catherine as replacing him misses the deeper possibility. Charles may be strengthening the partnership between the future king and queen rather than choosing one over the other. Catherine's influence could complement William's constitutional role, creating a powerful combination for the monarchy's next era. So, the alleged crown may not represent a transfer of power at all. It may represent something subtler. Charles recognizing the person he believes can help carry the monarchy's emotional identity forward. That possibility makes the opening claim harder to dismiss or understand. And if that interpretation is correct, the real significance of his final act may be far more complicated than the crown itself. What exactly has Charles been signaling through Catherine's growing prominence? Could her role reveal a carefully planned future for the crown? And is there something more significant waiting just beyond the public appearances? The next revelation may change how everything looks. Keep watching. Charles's quiet royal signal. By the time Charles stood at the center of Britain's modern monarchy, his reign raised an enormous question. How could an institution built around continuity move forward after Queen Elizabeth II? Her death at Balmoral Castle in September 2022 ended a 7-decade era of familiarity. Charles inherited the crown carrying not only the title of king, but the weight of succeeding a monarch whose presence had become inseparable from the institution itself. His coronation at Westminster Abbey on the 6th of May, 2023, formally marked the beginning of that new chapter. Yet the ceremony could not erase the challenge beyond pageantry. Charles had to establish his own reign while preserving the stability associated with Elizabeth. The future could not depend entirely on the sovereign sitting on the throne. it also depended on the generation standing behind him. Catherine gradually became part of that picture. As Princess of Wales, she was not next in line to inherit the crown. That position belonged to William. Her importance came from somewhere different, the way she could represent the monarchy in public, support its work, and connect its traditions with people outside palace walls. That distinction became increasingly difficult to ignore. Catherine officially supports the king through royal engagements at home and overseas, placing her in situations where the public sees her not simply as William's wife, but as a working member of the institution. Each appearance contributes to an impression of the next generation in the future, too. For Charles, that visibility could carry particular importance. A monarch can possess constitutional authority without automatically possessing emotional influence. Elizabeth spent decades building that connection through familiarity, duty, and presence. Charles inherited responsibility for protecting the institution's relevance, but public trust could not simply be inherited with the crown. That is where Catherine's role becomes more intriguing. Her growing presence did not mean that Charles was changing the succession, nor did it place her above William. Instead, it raised a quieter possibility. Charles could be shaping who helps embody the monarchy in the eyes of the public long before the next accession. The distinction matters because it changes the meaning of the entire story. If Catherine was becoming central to the monarchy's public image, then any gesture from Charles toward her could carry significance beyond ceremony. It could signal confidence in her ability to help preserve continuity while giving that continuity a more contemporary face. Nothing in that interpretation makes Catherine the constitutional leader of the crown. William remains the future king. Yet the question remains whether Charles recognized something formal succession cannot measure. Sometimes an institution's future depends not only on who inherits its authority, but on who can make people continue to believe in it. Catherine's absence changed how the public saw her, but did it also change how the palace saw her? Could that emotional bond become her greatest source of power? And what did Charles realize that could redefine her role entirely? Let's find out. Catherine's rise into influence. Catherine's rise within the monarchy became easier to understand when viewed through the period that pulled her away from public life. She had already developed a role as Princess of Wales, supporting royal duties while building a public identity of her own. Her charitable work focused on children, families, and early childhood development, giving her responsibilities that reached beyond traditional royal appearances. Then, her withdrawal changed the way the public looked at her. Her absence created speculation, and attention that had once centered on her clothing, appearances, and royal image began to take on a different direction. People were no longer watching a royal figure perform duties. They were waiting to see how Catherine would face a difficult period and whether she would return to public life. When she did begin returning to public life, the atmosphere surrounding her had changed. The Princess of Wales was expected to appear composed and prepared, but the public had now seen a more vulnerable side of her. That vulnerability did not necessarily weaken her position. Instead, it appeared to make her more relatable, allowing people to view her not through the polished image associated with royalty, but through the struggle behind it. That shift matters because the modern monarchy depends on more than titles and ceremonies. Public confidence is shaped by familiarity, trust, and the feeling that royal figures can understand experiences beyond palace walls. Catherine's story gave her a connection that could not be created simply through announcements. Her charitable work, particularly her focus on children and families, reinforced that connection by placing her in causes that affected ordinary lives. Yet, there was another question beneath the public affection. Could Charles have recognized Catherine's emotional connection with the public as something valuable to the institution itself? The possibility does not mean that she had become the constitutional leader of the crown. It does not replace William's position or alter the succession. Instead, it suggests that her importance could be measured in a different way. Catherine's leadership, within this interpretation, was becoming less about ceremonial authority and more about emotional legitimacy. Her ability to remain visible, purposeful, and connected after a difficult period gave her public role greater meaning. The very experience that temporarily removed her from view may have changed how people understood her when she returned. For Charles, that transformation could not have been easy to overlook. The monarchy needed figures who could carry tradition into a changing future without appearing distant from the people they served. Catherine increasingly appeared capable of doing exactly that. Whether Charles viewed her connection as an institutional asset remains uncertain, but the possibility adds another layer to the question surrounding her place in the crown. Yet William's position raises a deeper mystery. Was Catherine's rise really about elevating her, or was it designed to reshape the future king beside her? What did Charles understand about their combined power? And what happens when that partnership becomes the crown's greatest advantage now? Stay with us. William's role changes everything. The question surrounding Catherine becomes far more complicated once William's position is brought fully into view. Any suggestion that Catherine could simply become the monarchy's new leader runs directly into one of the clearest facts in the royal structure. William is the heir apparent and remains next in line to the crown. That reality changes the meaning of every claim about Catherine's growing influence. Catherine's importance, therefore, cannot reasonably be understood as a replacement for William. Her position as Princess of Wales exists alongside his role as Prince of Wales, creating a partnership that could become increasingly important to the monarchy's future. William represents the direct constitutional path toward the throne, while Catherine brings her own public presence, charitable work, and connection with people across the country. That distinction creates a tension at the heart of the story. If Charles recognizes Catherine's ability to connect with the public, does that mean he is elevating her above William? Not necessarily. It could mean something more strategic. Rather than choosing one future leader over another, Charles may be preparing both members of the next generation to carry different parts of the institution forward. The difference between succession and influence is crucial. Succession is defined by the established order. Public influence is far less predictable. It can grow through service, visibility, trust, and the way people respond to a royal figure. Catherine's increasing importance in that public sphere does not alter William's constitutional position, but it can still shape how the future monarchy is perceived. That is why the language surrounding a new leader becomes so provocative. Taken literally, it suggests a constitutional change that the established succession does not support. Interpreted symbolically, however, it can describe a different kind of elevation, Catherine becoming one of the people most closely associated with the monarchy's public identity. For Charles, that distinction could matter deeply. His legacy may not depend solely on how long he occupies the throne, but on how effectively he prepares the institution for what follows. Strengthening Catherine's role could therefore be part of strengthening William's future reign rather than competing with it. The deeper possibility is that the crown does not need to choose between William's constitutional authority and Catherine's public influence. The two could reinforce each other. William could inherit the throne, while Catherine helps shape the human face of that reign. That leaves the central mystery unresolved, because symbolism can sometimes reveal intentions that formal titles never fully explain about the monarchy's future. If Charles's actions toward Catherine were intended as a signal, perhaps the message was never that she would replace the future king. Perhaps it was that the future king would be strongest with her beside him. Elizabeth left behind more than a crown. She left a standard few could match. Can Catherine preserve that emotional bond? Can Charles keep tradition relevant without losing its soul? And what happens when the woman facing that impossible challenge steps into a role no one expected? Stay glued. The symbolic power behind crowns. The closer the story comes to the meaning of Catherine's alleged elevation, the more important Britain's constitutional system becomes. The crown may carry immense symbolism, but it does not give the sovereign unlimited power. In Britain's constitutional monarchy, the sovereign serves as head of state, while Parliament holds legislative power. That basic distinction changes how any dramatic gesture involving Catherine should be understood. A ceremonial moment, no matter how striking, could not make Catherine the constitutional monarch or place her ahead of William in the established succession. William remains the future king, and Catherine's position does not override that reality. Her growing public importance, therefore, exists on a different level, one that cannot be measured simply by titles or the order in which royal names appear. That difference is easy to overlook when royal symbolism becomes the center of attention. Crowns, robes, ceremonies, and palace settings can make a gesture appear larger than its formal meaning. Yet symbolism has always carried unusual weight within the monarchy. The institution represents more than government or constitutional procedure. It can also serve as a focus for national identity, unity, and continuity, giving public gestures a meaning that reaches beyond their legal effect. That is why the alleged crowning of Catherine becomes more complicated when viewed through this constitutional lens. If interpreted literally, it would suggest a transfer of authority that the established system does not support. If understood symbolically, however, the image could represent something very different: growing public confidence in Catherine and recognition of the role she could play within the monarchy's future. The distinction creates an important tension. A person can possess enormous public influence without possessing constitutional power. Catherine could become increasingly trusted, visible, and emotionally connected with the public, while William remains firmly positioned as the future sovereign. Those realities do not have to compete. In fact, they could strengthen one another. For Charles, that possibility gives symbolism a deeper purpose. His actions toward Catherine would not necessarily need to change the law to matter. A gesture could communicate confidence, continuity, or a belief that she has an important part to play in carrying the institution forward. The meaning would come not from changing the succession, but from shaping how the public sees the people who will represent it. Modern royal influence may increasingly depend on exactly those qualities. Visibility can create familiarity. Credibility can strengthen trust. Emotional connection can make an ancient institution feel relevant to people living in a very different age. So the crown, in this context, may be less important as an object than as an idea. It cannot legally transform Catherine into the monarch, but it can symbolize a changing relationship between the crown and the public. And that distinction leaves the larger question hanging. If Charles was sending a message through symbolism, what did he truly want the public to understand about Catherine's place in the monarchy's future? Yet what if Charles's most enduring legacy was never a ceremony at all? What if the person he publicly elevated mattered more than the title itself? And what was waiting just beyond that decision, ready to redefine the monarchy's future in ways few ever expected? Let's unravel the mystery. Charles's legacy takes shape. By the later years of Charles's reign, the question of legacy becomes impossible to separate from the future of the monarchy itself. His time on the throne is relatively short when compared with Elizabeth II's 7 decades, leaving him with a difficult task: to establish his own identity while carrying an institution still deeply associated with his mother. Every decision, therefore, can appear to carry two meanings: what it does immediately and what it might leave behind. Elizabeth's reign created a powerful standard of continuity. Charles inherited that legacy when he became king, but he also inherited the challenge of ensuring that the monarchy could adapt without losing its connection to tradition. His long-standing interest in modernization and continuity made that balance especially important. The institution had to remain recognizable, yet it also had to prepare for a future shaped by different expectations and a younger generation. That is where Catherine's growing public role becomes significant. As Princess of Wales, she represents part of the generation expected to carry the monarchy forward. Her visibility, charitable work, and support for royal duties give her an increasingly important place in the family's public image. Her position does not alter the succession, but it can influence how the public understands the people who will eventually represent the crown. For Charles, supporting Catherine could therefore have a meaning that reaches beyond any ceremony. It could strengthen the partnership between Catherine and William, allowing each to contribute something different to the future monarchy. William remains the future king, while Catherine can bring her own public influence and connection with communities. Together, they could represent continuity without simply repeating the past. Still, the idea of a secret constitutional decree or literal transfer of leadership is not supported by the established facts. The crowning should therefore be understood as an interpretive image rather than evidence of a formal change. Its significance lies in what the symbolism might suggest about Charles's priorities and the people he appears to value as part of the monarchy's future. That makes the phrase, "last public act," particularly intriguing. If Charles's most memorable act were not a new law or a change to succession, but a visible expression of confidence in Catherine, the meaning of his legacy would look very different. It would suggest that his reign was not simply about occupying the crown, but about preparing the institution for what comes after him. The deeper story, then, may be less about whether Charles literally crowned Catherine, and more about what he wanted her growing role to represent. His legacy could ultimately be measured by the strength of the transition he helped prepare, leaving one question still hanging over the crowns. The title may be the beginning. What did Charles truly signal by placing Catherine at the heart of the monarchy's future? Could her influence soon matter more than any title? And what happens when emotional power begins to rival constitutional tradition inside palace walls? Keep watching. The crown's future takes shape. The image of a crown beside Catherine carries a different meaning once the full story is brought together. What first appears to suggest a dramatic transfer of royal authority becomes, on closer examination, a question about influence, trust, and the future of the institution. The claim of a literal crowning remains unsupported, and that distinction matters because the established royal framework has not placed Catherine above William. William remains the future king, while Catherine remains the Princess of Wales. Nothing about her growing public importance changes that constitutional reality. Yet the absence of a new title does not mean her role is insignificant. Her position within the royal family has continued to give her opportunities to support the monarchy, from work connected with communities and children to charitable causes and national events. That growing visibility gives the story its deeper tension. Catherine does not need to inherit the crown to become one of the figures most closely associated with its future. Her influence can develop through public trust, service, and the way people respond to her presence. In that sense, leadership can exist without constitutional authority, creating a distinction that is easy to miss when attention is fixed on crowns and titles. Charles's relationship with Catherine can therefore be viewed as part of a wider transition toward the next generation. His reign has followed Elizabeth II's extraordinary era of stability and continuity, while the monarchy now faces the challenge of remaining relevant to people who did not grow up under the same relationship with the crown. Preparing the institution for that future cannot simply mean preserving old traditions. It also requires figures capable of carrying those traditions into a changing public world. Catherine's role may be especially important within that transition because she stands beside William rather than replacing him. William's constitutional position and Catherine's public influence can operate together, creating a partnership that reflects both continuity and change. That possibility gives new meaning to the dramatic language surrounding Charles's alleged final public act. Perhaps the most important question is not whether Charles literally crowned Catherine, because the available framework does not establish such a constitutional event. The more revealing question is whether his support and public treatment of her signal confidence in her ability to help embody the monarchy's future. If so, the greatest elevation may never have required a new title, ceremony, or constitutional announcement. It may have been something quieter, yet potentially far more significant. Recognition of the trust Catherine has gradually built with the public and the role she could play alongside William as the monarchy moves toward its next generation. Her influence may ultimately rest not on formal authority, but on something much harder to measure: emotional connection. The ability to make people feel represented, understood, and invested in the institution could become one of the crown's greatest strengths. And that leaves the story suspended between two very different kinds of power: what the monarchy formally grants, and what the public ultimately chooses to believe about its future. Now, what do you think? Did King Charles truly elevate Catherine's influence, or is the new leader claim hiding a deeper royal strategy? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.